He forced her to choose. HIM or pregnancy. She chose the baby who died anyway. The castle sat heavy on the hill, its gray stones cloaked in the mist of early morning. The sun had yet to rise, and a cold wind whispered through the courtyards, carrying with it the scent of distant rain. Princess Alara stood by the window of her chamber, staring at the darkened lands below. Her hand rested gently on the curve of her belly, a silent promise she had made to herself in the stillness of night. The child she carried was more than just a life. It was hope, fragile as glass, delicate as the first bloom of spring. And yet that hope was wrapped in shadows she could not escape. The kingdom she had been born to was one of power, of loyalty and betrayal, where love and fear often walked hand in hand. And now, love and fear had arrived at her chamber door in the form of King Kalen. Kalen was tall, regal, with eyes like storm clouds ready to break. His presence filled the room even before he spoke. Alara's heart, which had learned to beat with caution in his presence, now thumped with a mixture of fear and defiance. She had tried to ignore the way he could command a room, the way his words carried both ice and fire, but tonight she could not avoid him. "Alara," he said, his voice low and unyielding, "we need to speak." She did not turn immediately. She felt the weight of his gaze, sharp as the sword at the palace gates, and yet there was something unspoken in it, a tension that made her chest tighten. Slowly she turned, meeting his eyes with steady courage. "What is it, Kalen?" she asked, though her voice betrayed the tremor of unease she tried to hide. He stepped closer, and the shadows of the chamber seemed to grow heavier around him. "I know about the child," he said plainly. There was no accusation, no anger. Just the bare statement, like a blade pressed to her heart. Alara swallowed, feeling the sudden rise of panic she had fought to suppress. She had expected confrontation, yes, but not this calm certainty. You mean?" "Yes," he interrupted softly. "The child." "You must choose, Alara, choose between me and the life you carry." The words fell like stones in her chest. She had expected anger, perhaps threats, but this demand, this ultimatum cut deeper than any sword. Choose him or choose the child. The impossible decision weighed on her, each heartbeat echoing like thunder in the silent room. I can't," she whispered. Her hands clenched instinctively over her belly, as though the child inside could shield her from the storm of his presence. "I cannot choose between life and love. I choose the child." For a moment, Kalen's expression did not change. Then a flicker of something, pain, regret, perhaps something closer to fear, crossed his face. He stepped back as if wounded by her words. "You would defy me," he said quietly, not with anger but with disbelief. "I would," she answered, her voice stronger now, forged in the quiet steel of determination. "The child is innocent. The child has a right to live." Kalen's jaw tightened, his hands clenching at his sides. "Do you understand what you ask? This is not just defiance. This choice could destroy the kingdom, destroy everything I have built." Alara met his gaze without flinching. "I understand," she said, "and I accept the consequences. But the child's life matters more than power, Kalen, more than fear, more than your throne." For a long moment, silence filled the chamber. Outside, the wind moaned, carrying with it the scent of rain and distant thunder. Kalen turned toward the window, looking out at the shadowed lands that had been his domain since birth. His face was unreadable, carved in stone, yet Alara felt the tremor of uncertainty beneath it. "You are brave," he said finally, his voice soft, almost a whisper. "And foolish." "I am neither," she replied, her voice calm now. "I am only human, and I choose what is right." Kalen's eyes, dark as storm clouds, shifted to her, and for a brief moment the king seemed less a ruler and more a man who had loved and lost in ways no one could understand. "Then it seems we are at an impasse," he said. "You have chosen, and I cannot." Before he could finish, a sudden shadow passed over the room, as if the walls themselves had exhaled in warning. Alara felt a chill run down her spine. Something was wrong. She glanced down at her belly, at the life that fluttered like wings beneath her hands, and a quiet dread settled in her heart. Days passed in uneasy silence. Kalen remained at court, distant yet ever present, his eyes watching, always watching. Ilara tried to find solace in small moments. The songs of the birds in the palace garden, the gentle sway of the candle flames, the quiet warmth of her own heart that still beat for hope. But the shadow of his ultimatum lingered like a storm cloud refusing to pass. Then one night it happened. Ilara awoke to the sound of whispers, soft as silk and yet cold as iron. The air around her room trembled with something she could not name. Her heart raced. She clutched her belly, feeling the familiar flutter of life, and then nothing. A silence so complete it made her bones ache. She called out, first to herself, then to the servants, then to the walls of the palace that had always been her sanctuary. And yet the world was still. The child was gone. Ilara sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face. Her hands, trembling and weak, rested on the space that had once held hope. Rage, sorrow, and guilt rose in a tide so strong it seemed to pull her under. How could this happen? Why? She had chosen life, had chosen love, had chosen what was pure and sacred. And yet, Kalen came to her chamber, summoned by the servants who could not bear her cries. He found her on the floor, a shadow of the princess he had once known, her eyes hollow, her body shaking with grief. "Ilara," he said, kneeling beside her, his hand hovering over hers as if he feared the touch would shatter her completely. "Don't," she whispered, her voice brittle. "Don't speak. You said it was my choice. I chose, and now," her words broke, swallowed by sobs. "Now there is nothing left to choose." Kalen's own heart twisted at the sight of her despair. He had demanded the impossible, and in doing so, had unleashed a pain he could not mend. For the first time, he understood the weight of his own power, the fragility of the life he had sought to control. He reached for her hand, gently, reverently, but she pulled away, her grief a wall he could not breach. "I did not cause this," he said finally, his voice low, full of a sorrow that mirrored hers. "The child, it was taken by the curse, by forces older than us. Nothing we did could prevent it." Ilara shook her head, unable to meet his gaze. "Everything you did caused it," she whispered. "Everything. You gave me the choice, and it was no choice at all. It was a sentence, and I chose, and I was punished." Kalen remained silent, the words echoing in his mind. He had wanted power, certainty, control, but now he saw that even kings could not command fate. Even kings could not save what was most precious. Days turned into nights, and nights into a haze of quiet sorrow. Ilara wandered the halls of the palace, lost in memory and grief, while Kalen watched from afar, a silent witness to her pain. Neither knew what to say, nor could they. Words were useless here. Only the weight of what had been lost remained, pressing down like a storm that would not pass. Yet in the depths of despair, a seed of something else began to grow. Ilara, though broken, still carried a spark of strength, a flame of defiance. She had loved, she had chosen, and though the world had punished her, she still survived. And Kalen, haunted by the consequences of his demand, began to see that redemption was possible, even if it meant facing the darkness within himself. The first flicker of hope came in a quiet moment, in the garden at dawn. The wind carried the scent of rain, the sky a pale gray, and Ilara knelt among the flowers, her fingers brushing the soil as if she could feel life itself whispering to her. Kalen approached, his steps slow, cautious. "Ilara," he said softly, "I cannot undo what has happened, but perhaps there is a way to honor what was lost." She looked up, her eyes red and raw, meeting his gaze for the first time since the tragedy. In that look a question hung between them, one neither dared speak aloud. Could they find a path through grief? Could love survive the impossible? Before she could answer, a shadow passed over the garden, dark and fleeting, like a warning carried on the wind. And in that instant, both knew that their story was far from over. The world outside the palace walls was shifting, stirring with magic, danger, and secrets that would not remain buried. Alara stood, her heart heavy but her resolve steady. The child was gone, but the fight for hope, for justice, and perhaps for redemption had only just begun. And somewhere in the shadows, Kalen's heart stirred with a mixture of fear and longing, knowing that the choices they had made would bind them together in ways neither could yet understand. The storm was coming, and neither of them would escape its path. The dawn was pale and hesitant, the sun barely lifting above the distant hills. The castle walls, once strong and comforting, now seemed like a cage to Alara. She moved silently through the corridors, her steps echoing like whispers of old regrets. Every corner, every stone, carried memories of what had been lost. Her heart ached for the child she had chosen, and yet in the emptiness she found a strange kind of resolve. Life, even broken, must continue. The garden, where flowers had once bloomed with bright defiance, was now shadowed and quiet. Alara knelt among the faded petals, brushing her fingers against the damp soil. She closed her eyes, remembering the warmth of her belly, the small, impossible hope she had carried inside her. Tears came unbidden, and she let them fall. There was no shame in mourning what was gone, but she was not alone. Kalen had followed her, as he often did now, a silent presence in her life she neither wanted nor could ignore. He remained at a careful distance, his shadow long across the stones, yet she felt the weight of his eyes. He did not speak, and that in itself was a kind of mercy, for any words now felt fragile and meaningless. "Alara," he said softly, finally breaking the silence. His voice carried the same quiet authority that had once terrified her, but now it trembled with an honesty that made her chest tighten. "I cannot leave you like this." She did not look at him, focusing instead on the soil beneath her hands. "There is nothing you can do," she said. "The child is gone, everything is gone, and yet you follow me as if I am still your responsibility." "I follow you," he admitted, "because I must, because I owe you more than I can ever repay." Alara's hand stilled. The words were unexpected, and in their simplicity they carried the weight of truth. She had seen kings demand loyalty, warriors offer protection, but this was different. It was not duty, it was guilt, and perhaps something more. "You cannot repay what is lost," she said quietly. "No one can, and yet here you are still trying." Kalen stepped closer, though not close enough to touch her. "I cannot undo the past," he said, "but I can try to prevent more pain. I can try to make things right if you will let me." Alara remained silent. Her grief was a shield, stronger than any castle wall, and she was not ready to let anyone in, even him. Yet deep inside, a small, trembling part of her longed to believe him. Longed to see that maybe, just maybe, the future could hold something more than sorrow. That night, the wind carried whispers from the forests beyond the castle walls. Strange, soft voices like the rustle of leaves and the murmur of hidden streams, yet tinged with something older, more dangerous. Alara felt a shiver crawl along her spine. She had learned to trust her instincts, and they told her something was stirring, a force that would not wait for consent or understanding. The next day, she left the safety of her chambers. The forest called to her, its shadows deep and twisting, the trees swaying as if alive. Kalen followed, as he always did, his presence a constant reminder of the impossible bond between them. "Why do you follow me?" she asked, her voice sharper than intended. "Do you not have your kingdom, your people, your duties?" "My duties," he said slowly, "feel meaningless if I cannot protect what is left. And perhaps I follow because I cannot bear to see you in danger, even if you do not wish my protection." Alara clenched her fists at her sides, torn between anger and the tiny spark of longing she could not fully understand. The forest seemed to sense her turmoil, the air thick with quiet power, as if it were watching them, waiting. They walked in silence for hours, the only sound the crunch of leaves underfoot and the occasional distant call of a bird. Shadows shifted between the trees, and Alara felt the pulse of the forest, the heartbeat of something ancient. Here in this hidden place, grief and hope seemed to coexist, strange and fragile companions. Suddenly, a light shimmered between the trees, a soft, almost ethereal glow. Alara paused, her heart skipping a beat. Kalen stopped beside her, his hand hovering near hers, yet neither moved closer. "It is a token," she whispered, stepping forward cautiously. The light fell upon a small, delicate object lying on the ground. It was a charm, carved with strange symbols she did not recognize, and yet it felt familiar, as if it belonged to her heart itself. Kalen knelt beside her, examining the charm. "It is of old magic," he said. "I have seen it before in the catacombs beneath the castle. It is a sign, a message perhaps, from the past or from something beyond." Alara felt a flicker of hope she had not allowed herself to feel in weeks. "Could it be from the child?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "A sign that some part of them remains." Kalen looked at her, and for the first time his stern, guarded expression softened. "Perhaps," he said, "or perhaps it is a warning. Magic does not always act kindly, but it is significant, and we must not ignore it." The discovery pulled them closer, not in touch, but in shared purpose. For the first time since the tragedy, they were united, not by duty, not by fear, but by a common thread of curiosity, of the need to understand forces they could not control. Days turned into nights as they explored the forest, following the whispers of the trees and the faint glow of hidden lights. Strange creatures flitted in the shadows, neither wholly threatening nor safe, as if testing their courage. And in these moments, Alara and Kalen found themselves relying on each other in ways they had not before. He protected her from unseen dangers, his arm steady, his presence unyielding. She guided him through the forest's mysteries, her intuition sharp, her courage growing. Together, they began to understand the delicate balance between fear and trust, between grief and the quiet stirrings of hope. Yet, for all the moments of connection, tension simmered beneath the surface. Every glance, every unspoken word carried the weight of what had been lost. Grief was a constant companion, and desire, unacknowledged but undeniable, lingered like the scent of rain on dry earth. One evening, they reached a clearing bathed in moonlight. The air was thick with magic, the silence absolute. In the center of the clearing stood a stone altar, carved with symbols older than the kingdom itself. The charm had led them here, and Alara felt a shiver of recognition. "This place," she murmured, stepping closer. "I feel something that belonged to the child." Kalen moved beside her, his shadow long across the moonlit clearing. "It is a place of power," he said, "a place where the past and present meet, and perhaps where we might glimpse the future if we dare." Alara's fingers brushed against the cold stone, and a vision flickered in her mind, soft, fleeting like a whisper carried on the wind. She saw the child not as a memory but as a presence, watching over her, small and fragile yet full of light. Her heart ached with longing, and yet it was filled with a strange, quiet peace. Kalen watched her, noting the change in her posture, the soft exhale of relief that she could not suppress. "Do you see it?" he asked quietly. Alara turned to him, tears glistening in her eyes. "I do," she whispered. They are here. In some way they never left, and perhaps that is why we must continue for them, for hope." For a long moment they stood together, the moon casting their shadows across the altar, a quiet testament to grief and longing intertwined. The forest seemed to hold its breath, the magic humming softly in the silence. Then, without warning, the wind shifted. Shadows danced at the edge of the clearing, moving with intent, and a chill ran down Alara's spine. The forest was no longer passive, it had awakened, aware of their presence. Kalen stepped in front of her instinctively, his hand reaching for the sword at his side. "Stay close," he warned. "Something is coming." Alara's heart raced, not with fear but with the sharp thrill of uncertainty. She trusted him, yet she knew that even together they were vulnerable. The magic around them was alive, and it was testing them. A faint whisper echoed through the trees, soft and melodic, yet edged with danger. Alara could not understand the words, yet their meaning was clear. Change was coming. Something old, powerful, and relentless was stirring, and neither she nor Kalen could escape its reach. And then, as if summoned by the whispers themselves, a figure appeared at the edge of the clearing. A shadow, tall and dark, moving with grace and intent. Its presence sent a shiver through the air, a reminder that the forest held secrets far older and more dangerous than they could imagine. Alara and Kalen exchanged a glance, understanding passing silently between them. They were no longer merely survivors of their grief. They were participants in a story larger than either of them, a tale of magic, destiny, and hearts bound together by tragedy. The shadow moved closer, and the air thickened with anticipation. The forest waited, the moon held its breath, and the night seemed to stretch into eternity. Alara's hand brushed against Kalen's, a fleeting touch, and in that small gesture both felt a surge of connection, fear and longing, grief and hope, intertwined in a single heartbeat. The figure stepped forward into the moonlight, and in its presence everything changed. The moon hung low over the forest, its silver light casting long, trembling shadows. The clearing where Alara and Kalen had first seen the shadowed figure now felt smaller, enclosed, as if the trees themselves leaned closer to watch what would happen next. The air was thick with magic, old and restless, a pulse beneath the ground that seemed to echo their own hearts. Alara's fingers brushed against Kalen's as they stepped into the clearing again. The touch was brief, almost accidental, yet it carried warmth and unspoken understanding. Grief had been their bond before, but now fear and hope intertwined with it. The shadow that had appeared before was waiting, motionless yet alive, its presence both threatening and strangely familiar. Kalen stepped forward, his sword drawn, though he knew that steel alone would not guard them against this force. "Step back," he warned, his voice low and steady, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Alara shook her head. "No, I need to know why it is here. I need to know why the child," her voice faltered, trembling with the weight of unshed tears, "why they were taken from me." The figure stirred, a ripple of energy passing through the clearing. Its voice, when it spoke, was melodic but edged with an ancient authority that made the hairs on Alara's arms stand on end. "The child was never yours to protect," it said, its words both accusatory and sorrowful. "Yet the love you bore, that love is rare. It binds more than hearts, it binds fate." Alara's breath caught. "Bind fate? What do you mean?" The shadow seemed to shift, forming the vague shape of a tall figure, cloaked in silvery light and darkness all at once. "The bloodline of Kalen is cursed," it said. "A curse born of pride and ambition, of choices that ignored the heart for power. The child you carried was the first hope of breaking it, but death was part of the price. The balance must be restored before redemption is possible." Kalen's jaw tightened, his grip on the sword firm. "A curse," he said quietly. "Do you mean my family? All this time it was the curse that caused this." The figure nodded. "Not all, but enough. Your actions, your decisions, have consequences. You demanded a choice that was never yours to give, and the child paid the cost. Now if you seek to redeem yourselves, both of you must face what lies beneath the palace, where the curse was born, where it festers in shadows and old regrets." Alara's heart pounded in her chest. She had survived grief, anger, and despair, yet the idea of descending into the catacombs filled her with a new kind of fear. We must go there, now." "Yes," the figure replied, stepping aside. "Before the curse strengthens, before it consumes more than you can bear." Kalen glanced at her. "We face this together," he said, his voice unwavering. "No more silence, no more fear." Alara nodded, her throat tight. She had feared his presence, his authority, his choices, but in this moment she felt the spark of trust, fragile but real. "Together," she echoed. The catacombs beneath the castle were ancient, carved by hands long forgotten. The air was thick with dust and the weight of history. the walls etched with runes that glowed faintly in the dim light. As they descended, Alara felt the pull of the magic that had claimed her child, a force that was neither cruel nor kind, but simply relentless. Kalen led the way, his sword cutting faintly through the darkness, though the shadows themselves seemed to bend and twist around them. Each step echoed, a reminder that they were far from the warmth of the world above. Yet neither hesitated. Grief had strengthened their resolve, and now fear could not break it. In the deepest chamber, the source of the curse waited. A pedestal of black stone stood in the center, etched with symbols that seemed to shift when looked at directly. From it rose a faint, shadowy mist that whispered secrets in a language neither could fully understand. Alara's fingers itched to reach out, yet she held back. Magic, she had learned, could be as dangerous as grief itself. Kalen stepped beside her, his presence steadying her. "Whatever we must do," he said, "we face it as one. We cannot falter." Alara nodded, swallowing the fear that twisted her stomach. "I am ready," she whispered, though her voice shook. "For the child, for hope, for redemption." The shadow that had guided them appeared again, hovering above the pedestal. "The price of redemption is not small," it said. "You must confront the truth of your hearts. You must face what binds you, the guilt, the grief, the choices you made and will make. Only then can the curse be broken." Kalen took her hand, and she felt the strength in his grip, the silent promise that they would not be alone. Together they stepped toward the pedestal, toward the swirling shadow that mirrored the pain in their hearts. The air shifted suddenly, heavy with energy. Alara's mind was flooded with memories of the child she had carried, of the choice she had made, of the nights spent crying alone in her chamber. The images came fast, overlapping with moments of anger, longing, and unspoken love. She felt the sharp sting of regret, the ache of what could not be undone. Kalen's voice broke through the storm of memories. "Alara," he said, his words firm yet gentle, "you are not alone. We face this together." She looked at him, seeing the same grief mirrored in his eyes, tempered with something she had not noticed before, remorse and a willingness to change. I trust you," she said, the words tasting like both fear and hope. The shadows swirled higher, and then, in a sudden movement, the mist coalesced into the faint outline of the child. Alara gasped, her hands trembling. The figure was small, glowing softly with a light that seemed born from love itself. It reached out, a gesture that was neither accusation nor demand but pure presence. "Your love brought life even in death," the figure whispered, though no words were spoken. The air vibrated with meaning. "This love can break the chains of the curse if you are willing to sacrifice your pride and forgive yourselves." Kalen's grip on her hand tightened. "We must be honest," he said. "No more hiding, no more walls." Alara nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I am ready," she said. "I forgive you for the choice you forced, and I forgive myself for the pain I felt, for the anger that consumed me." The shadow pulsed, the air shimmering. "Then face it," it commanded. "Face what lies in the heart of the curse." The pedestal split open, revealing a small, dark pit that seemed bottomless. A cold wind rose from within, carrying whispers of past mistakes, regrets, and lost moments. Alara's stomach tightened, fear gnawing at her, yet she did not step back. Kalen lowered himself beside her. "We step together," he said, "into the darkness, into the truth, into the chance to redeem what was lost." Hand in hand, they stepped forward. The pit seemed to reach for them, pulling memories and emotions into the swirling shadow. Alara felt the guilt of her choice, the loss of the child, and the ache of love unspoken. Kalen felt his pride, his need for control, and the weight of his family's curse. Together, they confronted each memory, each emotion, each whisper of the past. And in doing so, they began to see one another in a way neither had before, not as a king or a princess, not as a ruler or a rebel, but as two hearts bound by grief, hope, and love that refused to die. The shadow twisted, testing their resolve, yet they did not falter. Alara's tears mingled with Kalen's quiet strength, and in that unity, the air began to change. The oppressive weight of the curse lifted slightly, as if the magic recognized their courage, their willingness to face themselves and each other. The child's figure shimmered brighter, reaching toward them with a small, glowing hand. Ilara felt a warmth bloom in her chest, a sense of peace she had not thought possible. Kaelin's arm went around her, and for the first time they allowed themselves to truly lean on one another. "You have faced the price," the shadow whispered, fading slowly. "And in your unity you have begun the path to redemption, but the journey is not yet over. Danger and darkness still linger. Yet know this, you are no longer alone, and the power of love, even in grief, is stronger than any curse." The chamber grew still. The pit of shadows closed, the runes on the walls dimmed, and the catacombs felt lighter, as if they had exhaled after centuries of holding pain. Ilara and Kaelin stood together, their hands intertwined, their hearts still trembling but steady. Ilara looked up at him, the faintest smile brushing her lips. "We survived," she whispered. "Together." Kaelin met her gaze, his eyes soft, vulnerable. "Together," he echoed. "And now we face what comes next, no matter how difficult, no matter how dark, together." The path back to the surface was quiet, yet both felt the stir of something waiting, something beyond the castle walls. Magic was still alive, still moving, still testing them. But for the first time, grief did not consume them. Hope, fragile but real, filled the spaces where sorrow had dwelled. As they emerged from the catacombs, the first light of dawn touched the horizon, painting the sky in pale gold. Ilara took a deep breath, feeling the air fill her lungs, carrying away some of the darkness. Kaelin stayed close, his presence a steadying force she could finally rely on without fear. But as they stepped into the garden, the wind shifted again, carrying whispers that chilled the skin. Somewhere in the distance, a new shadow stirred. A reminder that even in victory, the story was far from over. Ilara squeezed Kaelin's hand. "Whatever comes," she said, "we face it together." Kaelin nodded, his jaw firm, his eyes bright with determination and an unspoken tenderness. "Together," he repeated, and this time the word carried the weight of promise, of love forged in grief and strength tempered by sorrow. The forest whispered around them, alive with secrets, and as the sun began to rise, Ilara and Kaelin knew one thing. They had survived the price of redemption, but the true journey had only just begun. And in the shadows, the world waited. The castle felt different now, though the stones were the same. There was a quiet in the air, heavier than before, filled with both the weight of loss and the pulse of possibility. Ilara walked through the corridors, her hands brushing the cold walls, her mind tangled with thoughts of what had passed and what still awaited. Kaelin followed, silent, his steps careful. He had changed. Not in the face that the court saw, where kings demanded respect and obedience, but within. The grief, the guilt, the nights spent wandering alone in shadow had softened him, though not weakened. There was a quiet strength in him now, a willingness to confront the consequences of his past choices, and the courage to face the future with Ilara by his side. "The kingdom feels different," Ilara said quietly, her eyes tracing the high arches of the throne room. "As if the walls themselves remember what has happened." "They do," Kaelin replied. His voice was soft, measured, yet carried a weight that made her heart tighten. "The palace remembers the loss, the courage, the choices we made. It remembers the child, and it remembers us." Ilara's chest ached. Memories of the child surfaced again, not in pain this time, but in light. The warmth of their presence, however brief, lingered like a soft flame. "I still wish things had been different," she admitted. "I wish the choice had not been forced upon me. I wish," her voice faltered, swallowed by the quiet sorrow she carried. Kaelin moved closer, resting a hand gently on her shoulder. "I wish the same," he said, his voice low and unguarded. "But we cannot change the past. All we can do is honor what was lost and protect what remains, protect each other." Ilara turned to him, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes, a vulnerability that no crown could hide. "And do we protect our hearts as well?" she asked, a faint, trembling hope in her voice. Kalen's lips curved slightly, a rare, soft smile. "I think that is something we must try," he said. "Together." The morning sun filtered through the windows, casting long beams of light that touched the floor like warm fingers. Outside, the kingdom was stirring, people moving about their lives, unaware of the quiet battles of grief, courage, and magic that had taken place beneath their feet. Yet Alara and Kalen knew that their lives had shifted irreversibly. The world had changed for them and they had changed for it. But peace, even fragile, was never without challenge. The court awaited them, and with it, questions, doubts, and unspoken fears. Nobles whispered, their voices like threads in the cold wind, about the child's death, the strange disappearances in the forest, and the rumors of the curse that had plagued the royal line for generations. Alara met their eyes steadily, her voice firm. "The past is gone," she said, addressing the gathered lords and ladies. "We cannot change what has been lost, but we can honor it. We can act with wisdom and courage, as those we love would wish us to. Fear does not serve the kingdom. Love does, not only for those who remain, but for the memory of those who have left us." Kalen stepped beside her, his presence commanding, yet tempered by humility. "The curse that has haunted our line is weakened, not by power or fear, but by the courage to face truth and the willingness to forgive," he said. "We stand together, not to rule with iron, but to guide with justice and compassion. That is the true strength of a kingdom." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the court, but not all voices were silent. Shadows lingered, and not all hearts were ready to trust change. Alara felt the weight of these doubts like stones in her chest. But she was no longer the frightened princess who had trembled under the king's command. She was a woman shaped by grief, tempered by courage, and ready to stand as a guardian not only of the kingdom, but of the fragile hope that remained between her and Kalen. As the days passed, the bond between them deepened. They walked the castle grounds together, speaking of past regrets, shared fears, and small, fleeting joys. Laughter began to return in quiet moments, a sound that felt miraculous after months of sorrow. And slowly, the love that had been shadowed by grief began to grow, not as a blaze of passion, but as a steady flame, resilient and warm. One evening, as the sun set in a sky painted with gold and crimson, Alara found herself standing on the balcony, looking over the land she had once feared she could not protect. Kalen joined her, his hand brushing hers, tentative at first, and then more confident. "Do you ever wonder," she asked softly, if they are still watching us?" Kalen's gaze followed hers, to the distant hills where light and shadow danced together. "I believe they are," he said. "In the wind, in the trees, in the quiet moments when hope feels strongest. They are with us, Alara, always." Tears gathered in her eyes, not of sorrow this time, but of release. She leaned slightly against him, feeling his warmth, his strength. "Then we honor them," she said. "By living, by loving, by facing what comes next without fear." Kalen rested his forehead gently against hers. "By being brave," he added. "Even when the world is dark, even when loss is heavy, by trusting each other." Their moment was interrupted by a sudden rustle in the gardens below. Shadowed figures moved, graceful and deliberate, their intentions hidden but their presence undeniable. Alara instinctively stepped back, her hand finding Kalen's. The training, the courage, the lessons of the forest and catacombs had not left her. "They come," Kalen said quietly. "Not all dangers are gone, the world still tests us." Alara nodded, her heart steady despite the tension. "Then we face them," she said, her voice firm. Together, the figures emerged into the moonlight, revealing themselves not as enemies, but as guardians, keepers of balance, bound to ensure the kingdom's safety. They bowed low, acknowledging Kalen and Alara with respect, recognizing the courage and love that had weakened the curse and preserved the line. Alara felt a swell of gratitude. The magic of the world, once frightening and untamed, now seemed aligned with them. The forces that had caused so much pain could also bear witness to their redemption, guiding them toward a future that, though uncertain, was theirs to shape. In the weeks that followed, the kingdom slowly returned to a rhythm of life. Fields were tended, markets thrived, and the people began to sense the calm that had settled over their rulers. Alara and Kaelin worked side by side, their decisions tempered by the lessons of grief and courage. They were no longer only a princess and a king. They were guardians, not just of the throne, but of hope itself. One quiet evening, Alara wandered to the garden alone, thinking of the child, thinking of the path they had traveled, and of the love that had grown between her and Kaelin. The first stars appeared, shy and twinkling, as if the sky itself offered a gentle blessing. Kaelin joined her, sliding his hand into hers without hesitation. "Do you remember the first night we came to the forest?" he asked, a faint smile brushing his lips. Alara nodded, the memory vivid, the shadows, the whispers, the fear, and the spark of trust that had begun between them. "I remember," she said. "It feels like a lifetime ago." "It does," he said softly, "and yet it was the beginning. The beginning of everything that matters now, the beginning of us." Alara's heart fluttered. The grief was still there, faint but present, a reminder of what they had lost. Yet the love they shared, the courage they had discovered in one another, had created something enduring. Something stronger than any curse, any shadow, any fear. She turned to him, her eyes shining with quiet determination. "Then we face the future, Kaelin. Whatever comes, we face it together, for the kingdom, for hope, and for them." Kaelin nodded, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "Together," he said, "always." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it a faint, warm whisper, the memory of the child, the echo of love, and the promise of new beginnings. The kingdom, the castle, the forest, and the hearts of those who had faced grief and darkness now breathed with a fragile, shining hope. And in that hope, Alara and Kaelin found the strength to stand, hand in hand, ready to meet whatever the world had in store. The past could not be undone, the child could not return, but their hearts, their courage, and their love had survived. The shadows of sorrow had lifted, leaving only light tempered by remembrance. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Alara and Kaelin truly believed in the possibility of tomorrow. The storm had passed, and in the ashes of grief, life had begun again.